"Get out of this house," she spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't belong here. You're not even his real mother." The words hit the air like poison, heavy and cold. Ruth froze near the bottom step, one hand steadying herself on the cane that had belonged to her own mother. The shock widened her eyes before pain overtook them, an old, private kind of ache that seems to remember every slight it's ever known. Her other hand lifted on instinct, as if to catch the sentence and crush it before it spread. From the foyer threshold, Malik Hart watched the scene like a man arriving at a house fire and realizing the blaze had started in his own chest. The tulips he'd brought, white as breath on winter glass, hung from his fingers. He had come home early to surprise Ruth. No one was supposed to know. The chefs were off, the grounds crew was thinning the wisteria out back, and Sterling House held that late-morning hush that always made him think of prayer. He had not prayed for this. Vivian Cole stood 3 feet from Ruth with her jaw set and one hand pressed to her hip, a statue of expensive indignation. The heel she wore was pointed like a threat. The smile she had arranged earlier had collapsed into something practical, useful to win or wound, whichever came first. "Vivian." His own voice startled him. It sounded far away, like a memo being read in a boardroom he no longer recognized. She flinched, then pivoted with professional speed. The anger left her face so quickly it looked like a trick of light. "Malik, oh my God, you scared me." She folded concern around herself like a silk shawl. "Your mom tripped. I was trying to help her up. She just—" Ruth's body reacted before her mouth could. She recoiled when Vivian reached for her. "Don't," Malik said. Not loud, not theatrical. The kind of don't that closes doors and opens exits. "Don't touch my mother." The tulip slipped out of his hand and landed without a sound, petals skidding across marble. Later he would remember the shape they made, like a small white constellation shattered on the floor. "Malik, be reasonable," Vivian said, softer now, the way people talk to pets from high balconies. "She gets confused. I've noticed it. This morning." "You've noticed nothing that is yours to notice," he said. His eyes hadn't left Ruth. He slid an arm under her elbow. "Can you walk with me, Ma?" "I'm all right," Ruth murmured, but the words shook. Her hand trembled in his, a delicate bird trying to rest on a moving branch. Vivian's lips parted, outrage peeking through the gloss. "We are not doing this in front of staff." "There is no staff here," Malik said, and realized halfway through saying it that it was true mostly. The house was quieter than usual. Maybe that was why the truth echoed so clearly. He guided Ruth toward the sitting room, everything in him tuned to the tiny sounds of her moving, the hesitant set-down of the cane, the careful shuffle of her slippers, the breath she took before each step. Each sound made him smaller and angrier at once, anger refolded into something colder, more precise. "Malik," Vivian said from behind them, a plea rehearsed to sound unrehearsed. "Don't embarrass me. Let's talk upstairs. I'll make tea." He did not look back. "Pack your things." Silence stretched and snapped. "You're throwing me out on a misunderstanding." He stopped in the doorway of the sitting room and turned just enough to let the frost in his eyes do the rest. "Don't speak to my mother again." The sentence fell like a gavel. When he faced forward, Ruth had set her jaw, a familiar expression from the years she'd spent pushing a life uphill with both hands. She sat slowly, the cream upholstery taking her carefully, as if even the furniture remembered who had chosen it. He knelt to check her wrist, skin already blotched with the first shadows of bruising. He hated that his thumb knew the difference between old and new hurt. "I should have told you," Ruth said. It sounded like confession and apology, and it made him want to smash something beautiful just to make the outside match the inside. "How long?" The question dragged through his teeth. Ruth inhaled, eyes following the crown molding around the room the way people follow hymns they don't have the notes for. "A while," she said. "Long enough to be tired of it." He nodded once, a small contained explosion. "Okay." In the hallway, a suitcase made of quiet noises. A zipper, a drawer, the metallic stutter of someone trying to look controlled, while panic changed the climate inside their body. Vivian didn't come back into the room. He was grateful. He didn't know what he'd do if she did. He stayed with Ruth until the house was still again. A thin strip of afternoon had started to paint the carpet. The tulips lay in the foyer where they'd fallen, a white flag on the floor of a war he had not realized he was losing. There are rooms in every life where the past waits, patient and immediate. Malik walked into one that evening. He fell into the old chair by Ruth's bed in the guest room across the hall, the softer bed, the window angled at the birches, the quilt that had survived all the moves and new houses. Ruth's wrist was bandaged now. A private doctor had come and gone with the efficiency of people who are used to privilege and sometimes forget tender things take time. He watched Ruth drift. Sleep came in toward her in small waves, retreated, came back again. The way tired water does on a shore that's had enough weather. "Baby," she whispered without opening her eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Like this had always been one of Ruth's superpowers, making jagged things sound gentle so that they could be held. "I'm here," he said. She smiled. The shape of it more memory than muscle. "Always," she breathed, and sleep finally took her hand. Malik leaned back and stared at the ceiling, where a hairline crack looked like a map to a country he didn't want to visit. The room smelled faintly of lavender and clean cotton. In some other timeline, he would have posted a photo of the tulips, and the caption would have been something like, "Home early. Surprises for the real CEO." In that timeline, the comments would be heart emojis and crown icons, and Vivian would send him a winking face from the other side of the country, and he'd call her, and the lie would keep breathing. He got up and crossed the hall. The foyer was a still life. The tulips on the marble, Vivian's silk scarf thrown over the newel post, a bright serpent asleep. The house had the aftertaste of a storm. Metal, ozone, a prickle at the base of the skull. He gathered the bouquet with more care than he felt, carried it to the kitchen, and put the stems into a tall blue glass they'd found at a thrift store before money had changed the way stores looked. He filled the glass at the sink and wondered when, exactly, Vivian had decided that kindness was a costume. A memory surfaced. The fundraiser in Manhattan 2 years ago, the first time he noticed the way she noticed him. Vivian in a black dress that understood engineering. Him in a tux that made him feel like a stand-in for someone more important. She'd asked him questions about access and education, about algorithmic bias and the zip codes that predict outcomes more accurately than aptitude tests. She'd known the right verbs. He'd been tired and lonely and dazzled by competence. He'd mistook performance for sincerity, fluency for fluence. He gripped the edge of the counter until the sting in his palm named itself. Shame. The shame wasn't about being wrong. People are wrong. The shame was about what his wrongness had cost Ruth when the house was quiet and he was a continent away. He kept moving because the stillness felt like surrender. He texted security, apologized for the surprise return, then asked them to escort Ms. Cole to a downtown hotel and to ensure she did not re-enter Sterling House without written permission. He added a note he never thought he'd write. Record copies of all exterior and interior cam footage from the past 6 months. Send to me encrypted. The reply came back. "On it, sir," the house exhaled. He hadn't realized it had been holding its breath, too. He did not sleep. He moved through the night like a man walking the perimeter of a fence he'd just realized had gaps. Midnight found him in his study where the fireplace sat unlit and the leather chairs crowded the quiet. The desk lamp fashioned a small circle of day. On the blotter lay a journal he'd picked up in Austin months ago and never touched. A soft brown cover, paper thick enough to invite honesty. He opened to the first page and wrote 3 words he didn't recognize as his until he had to look away from them. "I should have known." On the next line, "How didn't I know?" He didn't have an answer that would make him better. He didn't write more. He closed the journal and placed it under the lamp as if warmth could change the grammar of regret. At 2 a.m., he found himself in the pantry eating a cold nectarine over the sink, the juice running down his wrist. He thought of the old apartment over the laundromat, of Ruth counting tips and quarters on the laminate counter, of the way fruit had been a season and not a default. He'd become a person for whom fruit could be flown in. He hated that realization, not because of the expense, but because of what it meant about drift. At 3 a.m., he returned to the chair by Ruth's bed and fell asleep upright, snapping awake every time she shifted. At 5, dawn began its quiet work at the edges of the blinds, a gentle brightness asking permission to enter. Ruth stirred, turned toward him, and smiled with the kind of affection that survives neglect and weather. "Still here," she murmured. "Always," he said. And this time the word felt like a contract he was ready to honor. By noon, the practical world had arrived at the door with its clipboards and credentials. The family doctor examined Ruth and adjusted her meds. A physical therapist performed small strength tests and nodded with professional optimism. The house manager, face pale with apology, asked questions he didn't need the answers to, then saw to it that rugs were anchored and corners softened. Malik watched, intervened only when Ruth's patience began to fray. She didn't like being observed doing things she used to do without thinking. "You can dismiss them," she said at last, dry but kind. "I'm not a museum exhibit," he smiled. "You are," he said. "You're the only one I visit without getting bored." She snorted and waved a hand. "Flatterer. Go call your people. The whole world pauses when you take a breath, right?" "Not this world," he said. "This world is the only one I care about pausing." He helped her to the sunroom, the one with the hungrier light and the succulents she talked to when she thought no one was listening. She lowered herself into the corner of the sofa with a small sigh that sounded like truce. "Baby," she said after a minute of watching dust float in the sun. "Don't let this make you cruel." He studied her profile. "You think I have cruelty in me?" She smiled without looking at him. "We all do. That's why we need other people." She tapped the cane lightly on the rug, a tiny punctuation mark. "Don't let anger turn you into what hurt you." He nodded. "I won't. You can be firm," she added. "Firm is love's older cousin." He laughed, sudden and grateful. She could still do that. Reach into the mess and pull out a sentence that made a window. The window cracked wider when the house manager reappeared in the doorway, hovering. "Mr. Hart, Ms. Cole has been escorted off the property. She asked to leave a note." Ruth's mouth tightened. "No notes," Malik said, then softer. "Thank you." The manager hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Sir, there is also the matter of the morning's sounds. Some of the crew heard raised voices before they went off-site." Malik understood what he meant without asking. The city only needed a spark to turn a private pain into a podcast. "No one is to speak to press. If anyone is contacted, refer them to legal." He heard how that sounded and almost said something about truth and privacy and dignity, then realized the instruction was enough. He could live the rest. When the door closed again, Ruth said, "It's going to get loud." "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." She gave him a look mothers keep for adult sons who've accidentally shrunk after a confidence. "Baby," he surrendered the false hope. "It's going to get loud," he repeated. Ruth nodded. "You can let the noise wind itself out," she said. "You don't have to dance when it starts playing." "Did you ever?" he asked. "Never," she said. "Couldn't afford the shoes." They shared a soft smile that sat cleanly between them, and he felt the house tilt back toward itself. He met Vivian one last time that afternoon, not because he wanted to, but because some endings deserve witnesses. The hotel suite was neutral in the way expensive rooms are taught to be. He chose it for that reason. No ghosts, no history. He arrived early and stood by the window, watching small traffic knead itself through the city. He didn't practice what he would say. The practice was already in him, the part of him that had spent years explaining difficult things to people who only cared about the line that made the most money. Vivian was on time. She wore grief like perfume, obvious enough to read, subtle enough to almost forgive if you didn't know what it cost. Her makeup was nearly gone, a choice or a coincidence he didn't care to investigate. "Malik," she said, stepping forward. She reached with both hands as if it were still a life where that was allowed. He did not move to meet them. He gestured toward the chair opposite the low table. The ring box between them made the room feel colder. "Is this really necessary?" she asked after a quiet minute, glancing at the box as if it might blink. You're going to throw away what we have because your mother tripped and had one of her episodes? The word clicked into place like a key in the wrong lock. You can keep pretending, he said, but not to me. Malik, I know she raised me, he said. I know she worked nights so I could work days. I know she has never turned cruelty into a hobby. Vivian's eyes flared. So that's the narrative we're going with. He felt a small, pitying fatigue. There isn't a we anymore. You can't really believe I'm the villain here. I don't believe in villains, he said. I believe in choices. You've made yours. She stared, then laughed once, low and incredulous. This is about optics, isn't it? The great Malik Hart protecting his brand. He tilted his head, studying a stranger he had once promised a future to. My brand, he said, is the woman who taught me to return shopping carts even when it's raining. For a moment, something like fear crossed her face. Not because she was losing him, he realized, but because she was losing a room that had once reflected her back the way she preferred. She closed her eyes and opened them again, and the old expression returned. The curated innocence that had disarmed donors and disoriented him long enough to call it love. I love you, she said softly. He let the sentence stand. There was no virtue in interrogating it. I'm not taking the ring, she added, chin lifting. I'm not doing you the favor of making this look like your choice. It is my choice, he said, and my consequence. Keep it or don't. Either way, we're finished. She stood abruptly, the chair whispering across the carpet. You'll regret this. He didn't. He wouldn't. Regret requires a different set of facts. When the door closed behind her, he let himself breathe out fully for the first time that day. The breath felt like a country he hadn't visited since childhood. He drove without a destination for an hour, like an old habit he was trying on to see if it still fit. The city unfurled, then folded back into itself. He passed the diner where Ruth liked the lemon pie more for the memory than the flavor. He considered stopping, then didn't, and felt the grief of every small thing betrayal steals. At a red light, he thought about the footage he'd requested. He didn't want to watch it. He would if Ruth needed him to, but some reality lives better as testimony. He would trust Ruth's voice with the ferocity he should have trusted it months ago. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Texts from the world. An investor asking about a panel. A journalist he'd never met requesting a quote about the rumored shift in Malik's personal life. A friend from the old days sending 3 words, "You good, man?" He let them sit. There are kinds of silence that are not avoidance, but stewardship. When he turned back into the long drive at Sterling House, evening had begun to paint the edges of the lawn. The birches looked almost silver. In the foyer, the tulips had opened wider, oblivious to the context of their own beauty. He carried them back to the kitchen, found a simple ceramic vase, and cut the stems shorter so they could drink. He placed the vase in the sunroom on the table near Ruth's seat. When she came in slowly with the nurse's arm under her elbow, her eyes found the flowers first. You always did bring home apologies and bouquets, she teased. Voice thin but bright. They're not apologies, he said. They're promises? Promises are just apologies that haven't failed yet, she replied, grinning at her own line, then wincing when a rib reminded her where the day had pressed. He eased her down gently. How's the pain? Present, she said, but manageable. The doctor's good looks help. He laughed, grateful for the corner of levity. The nurse blushed theatrically on cue. The room filled with a warmth that was not denial but defiance. In a house designed for displays, they were practicing a smaller, sturdier kind of beauty. After the nurse left, Ruth studied him over the rim of her tea. What now? He could have said lawyers, statements, NDAs, the antiseptic ballet of money and reputation. Instead, he said the thing that mattered first. Now I take care of you. You always have, she said. Not always, he answered. And neither of them pretended otherwise. Then start now, Ruth said, as if it were the simplest instruction in the world. Start small. Start with dinner, he blinked. Dinner? We have a chef. We have a kitchen, she corrected. He grinned despite himself and went to the fridge. He found eggs, spinach, onions, a block of feta, a lemon that remembered sun. He cooked like a man who'd learned his mother's recipes by watching her hands and reading smells. He oversalted the first omelet and undercooked the second. Ruth teased him, then devoured both like a queen humoring a prince. When he squeezed lemon over the greens, she made an approving sound that he realized he hadn't heard in weeks. They ate with the sliding door open. The evening poured in, first the pink, then the gold, then that blue that belongs to people who've suffered and still stepped outside. When the plates were pushed back and the tulips had opened even more, Ruth reached for his hand. "Baby," she said. And in that one syllable he heard Tulsa bus stops and night shifts and the paper-thin Christmases that still managed miracles. "We don't choose what breaks us. We choose what we build after," he nodded, throat tight. "I'm going to build better. Build gentler," she said. "Better can get loud." Gentle lasts. They sat like that for a while, the day rearranging itself into memory. That night Malik wrote again. He listed what he knew. Ruth's pain had been quiet. Vivian's cruelty had been curated. His success had made rooms applaud at the wrong times. He had been too busy to hear the difference between a whistle and a warning. He listed what he knew. Ruth's pain had been quiet. Vivian's cruelty had been curated. His success had made rooms applaud at the wrong times. He had been too busy to hear the difference between a whistle and a warning. He listed what he wanted. A house that felt like home and not a museum. Policies at his companies that protected the eldest among them as fiercely as they protected intellectual property. A foundation that honored the hands that had steadied him. He wrote a final sentence, the only one that came out like a vow. No one who loved me into this life will be unsafe in it. He closed the journal and turned off the lamp. In the dark, Sterling House breathed around him, not as a brand or a headline, but as the place where a boy had become a man and then had to become a better one. Down the hall, Ruth slept. In a downtown hotel, a life he'd mistaken for love ran its fingers along a ring it had tried to earn with charm. Out in the city, rumor engines revved and idled, choosing the right angle for someone else's pain. The night held all of it, indifferent and immense. Malik lay awake and listened for the sound the truth makes when it finally takes its seat. It sounded like his mother's steady breathing, like tulips opening in the dark, like a promise refolding itself into action. Morning would come, and with it the noise and necessity of the public world. He would step into it, but not the same way. Tomorrow might require statements and strategy. Tonight required only this, the quiet knowledge that love had been defended, and that the defense would go on. By morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines, blogs, gossip accounts. Tech billionaire ends engagement amid family scandal. Malik said nothing. He didn't have to. Silence was its own testimony. Vivian tried to control the fire. She posted a glossy apology video talking about pressure, misunderstanding, and private pain. The comments tore it apart. Staff from Sterling House began speaking anonymously about what they had seen. Small cruelties, long silences, Ruth's quiet endurance. The world believed what it had ignored before. Perfection had teeth. Malik withdrew from the noise. He canceled interviews, skipped investor dinners, stopped flying. Each morning he made tea for his mother and read to her from the paper, skipping every article that had his name. In the evenings, he walked the gardens with her, relearning the shape of peace. Weeks passed. When Ruth's strength returned, Malik called his board and told them his decision. He would remain CEO, but most of his time and wealth would now fund a new venture, the Ruth Hart Foundation, dedicated to protecting and supporting elders who suffered neglect behind polished doors. Money built these walls, he said quietly, so money will break them open. The foundation started small, a hotline, a legal aid grant, a training program for caregivers called Hands That See. Malik personally funded scholarships for nurses and single parents. Their symbol was a single white tulip. Within months, the program spread across the state. Families wrote letters. Old voices called to thank him. Each thank you felt like a small repair in the roof of his heart. Vivian disappeared from the headlines, her sponsors gone, her charm expired. Malik never mentioned her again. He had no hate left to spend. One evening, while supervising a new community center, he met Amara Wells, a nurse who volunteered after long shifts. She laughed easily, listened more than she spoke, and never once asked him about his fortune. When she met Ruth, they traded recipes and laughter like old friends. It wasn't fireworks this time. It was steady warmth, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. By the first spring of the foundation's work, Sterling House felt alive again. Neighbors visiting, music from the porch, Ruth's roses blooming over the railing. Malik still worked, but differently now. His empire was no longer about wealth. It was about worth. One morning, watching sunlight slide over the tulips by the window, Ruth said softly, "You thought you lost everything that day?" Malik smiled. "I found everything that matters." And in that quiet, he finally believed it. A full year had passed since the day tulips hit the marble floor. Time hadn't erased the memory. It had only softened its edges, turning pain into something that could be held without bleeding. The Ruth Hart Foundation had grown far beyond Malik's original vision. What began as one hotline in Oklahoma was now a nationwide network. Volunteers, nurses, caseworkers, and community advocates united by a single belief: no elder should ever suffer in silence. Its symbol, a white tulip on a silver pin, had become a quiet badge of honor among caregivers everywhere. Malik stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't sit for magazine covers anymore. He declined gala invitations and tech awards. Instead, he spent mornings reviewing grant proposals, afternoons at local centers, and evenings beside his mother on the porch, where the world finally felt human again. Ruth thrived in her new role. Once quiet and private, she had become a gentle voice for thousands. When she spoke at events, people leaned in, not because she was famous, but because her words felt like truth sown to love. "We don't get smaller with age," she said once, standing on a stage in Dallas. "We just need to be seen again, to be listened to, and to be treated like the stories we've already lived still matter." The applause lasted nearly 3 minutes. Malik watched from the front row, eyes shining. He realized then that every sacrifice, every lost partnership, every headline had been worth it just to see her shine in her own right. Sterling House was no longer a museum of wealth. Gone were the sterile white walls and imported sculptures Vivian once adored. In their place were warm colors, family photos, and shelves of books Ruth had loved since before Malik could read. Neighbors dropped by with pies and garden tools. Staff members stayed longer, not out of duty but out of affection. Laughter lived there again, unforced, unfiltered. Amara Wells had become part of that rhythm. She was a nurse, steady and kind, who volunteered for the foundation after long hospital shifts. At first, she and Malik spoke mostly about work, policy drafts, funding models, caregiver safety. But over months, the conversations changed shape. They spoke about music, about childhood, about the strange loneliness that follows success. Amara didn't treat him like a billionaire or a wounded man, just like someone learning how to live again. Ruth noticed before Malik did. One evening, as Amara laughed with her over a chessboard, Ruth gave her son a knowing smile. "She's good for this house," she said. Malik chuckled. "You said that about your aloe plant last week." "Exactly," Ruth replied. "Strong roots. Heals quietly." The words lingered. Spring returned, and with it, color. Tulips blossomed again along the walkway. Malik planted them himself that year. Each petal, each stem felt like a promise fulfilled. The foundation held its first Caregiver Appreciation Gala, not in a hotel ballroom, but in a local community park strung with lanterns and laughter. There were folding chairs, food trucks, live music, and speeches that sounded more like prayers. Amara coordinated the event, Ruth gave the keynote, and Malik stood quietly at the back, smiling. A local journalist approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Hart," she said, "people call you the man who rebuilt his fortune into compassion. What changed you?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Love," he said simply. "The kind that hurts you until it teaches you." That quote went viral the next day, but Malik didn't notice. He was busy helping Ruth into the car and laughing when she teased him for forgetting her cardigan. In the months that followed, the foundation expanded into 12 states. They opened care homes, trained new nurses, and funded emergency response teams for elder abuse cases. Every building carried a plaque engraved with Ruth's favorite line, "Kindness is not charity, it's duty." The world began to call Malik something new, the quiet billionaire. He didn't mind. For the first time in years, the titles didn't matter. He had built something no stock price could measure. At home, he and Amara grew closer, slowly, naturally. There were no grand gestures or headlines. They shared dinners, laughter, small silences that felt safe. When she stayed late to help Ruth with her medicines, Malik caught himself smiling, not because of romance, but because of peace. Peace was a language he had forgotten he could speak. One evening, Ruth watched them from the porch and said softly, "She walks beside you, not behind you. That's the kind that lasts." Malik only nodded. He didn't need to say more. Some truths didn't need decoration. The following year, Ruth's health began to fade. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow surrender, gentle and dignified. Malik stayed by her side through every appointment, every quiet afternoon. One night, as rain tapped softly against the window, she took his hand and whispered, "You kept your promise." "Which one?" he asked. "You built better," she said, smiling. "Now promise me one more thing. Keep living." Those were her last clear words before sleep carried her away. The morning she passed, the tulips in the garden bloomed early, pure white against the wet soil. Malik buried her under the biggest tree on the hill behind Sterling House, where sunlight always lingered a little longer. The foundation held a memorial that drew thousands, but Malik didn't speak. He simply placed a single tulip on her photograph and walked away quietly. Months later, standing on the same porch where she used to sit, he looked out at the garden and whispered, "I kept my word, Ma." Behind him, Amara stepped out, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. He turned and smiled. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It was alive, filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that stays. The world had called him a billionaire, a visionary, a reformer. But Malik knew what he truly was, a son who had finally learned what it meant to protect what mattered. And as the wind moved softly through the tulips, he felt her presence in every breath of peace.